Okay, it's about 7 o'clock in the evening, June 8th, 2011. I know, I've got to turn this around here. See, that'd been a cool effect if it worked. But anyway, so I know I'm walking some, but I'll stop for this story soon. And this is the story about the moment of truth. It's about 7:15 or so. And let me see, find a good spot for this story. Okay, it's like, as if we're walking down in this lane, and all of a sudden we stop and I tell you a story. And so this is one of those stories. Let me get in the shade, because it was dark when this happened, this story happened. So anyway, okay, so this story is about my grandmother and my grandfather. Probably could tell me exactly how old I was. I really have no idea. It's either when 5th grade, 6th grade, or 7th grade. I'm not really sure. But I'm up in Presqu'île, Alpena area, and this was one of the really great times of my life. You know, I had some nightmares. I mean, nightmares that I wouldn't want upon my enemies. But sometimes I had really great moments. And this one moment that I'm not ready to tell you was probably one of the most significant moments of my young life. And very changing, life-changing. And I don't, you know, whether you believe in God or you don't believe in God, we all have our own stories. And just let me tell my own. It's not about a debate whether there's God or not. That's not my thing on this. But there's enough people telling you that there's a God while they're hurting you. So I'm not going to tell you all these stories about that there's a God or whatever. But this is just my story, and I'm sticking to it. So anyway, this is one of those times I felt I really belonged in life, even though there was no one around. I loved nature. Anyway, so during that time, my grandfather, I would be out in the woods and just, I mean, always going out in the woods and just really exploring, and it was a really great time for me. And so I would explore, and I would just go out there, and it was like adventure. And my grandfather, Edward Voidovich, one of the most influential people in my life, probably. And that's my dad's dad. And my dad's been very influential too, and we've had a lot of good moments ourselves too. It was really cool moments. And some of those moments were up there, in fact, just walking around. But I had some really strong times with my grandfather, because it was just me and my grandfather and out there in the middle of absolutely nowhere, right? So I would go out in the woods and I would start, if I had got something in my head, my grandfather would actually help me carry it through. I mean, that's what was so cool about my grandfather. He was very strict. He was very hard. I mean, if you dug a hole, it was never the right way you dug the hole. I mean, it was just never that way. But he did some really great things in my life. And one of these things that he did in my life was I was starting to build a hut out of branches or something like that. And he was a construction guy. So he actually built this fort for me. It was awesome. I wish I had pictures of it. It was like, I lost all my pictures. That's part of my stories. But he built it out of cedar. I had a porch. I would carry big 5-gallon buckets. Yeah, I was a young kid, but I was strong. And I would carry 5-gallon buckets to basically water my rock garden. It was kind of funny. That's basically what I had out there. You know, Presqu'île had a lot of rocks. But he roofed it. And anyway, I would go out here, and I would spend the night in this fort. But it was more than a fort, because it had a roof, it had a door. It's almost hard to believe what it was like. It was like a little house. I mean, it was a little house that when you got older, you had to actually duck into and duck under to get in. Anyway, I'm there out in the woods. And there's this one night, this one particular night, I remember, this was so significant for me. I was there, and many times I would sleep out there when it was thunder and lightning, and it was just, I had a fire going, and I could see the fire through the tabs of the wood, and it was flickering, and I was building, I would be building things out there, and I would be in my little cot and all snuggled up, and it's like, oh, you know, all the little sounds out there as a young kid. Oh, my goodness. And this is a cool thing about my grandparents. They always let me do things that most parents wouldn't let their kids do. Anyway, I mean, I was a stone's throw. I couldn't see the house as the foliage grew up, but I was close enough where you could barely see the fort, depend what time of year it was. So it was still not that far from the house. But I would go out there as a young kid, and I would stay the night out there. It was awesome, just me and nature. And one of these particular times, I'm out there, and it had rained. It had rained the night before. And people are going to screw up this story. I remember people retelling the story, and they don't. Religious people, or the people that are in their faith things kind of get this whole story screwed up. But anyway, I don't want to mess up my story. This is my story, right? Anyway, I'm sorry. I'm going to stop here for a minute. Some people, I tell the story, and, you know, they ruin my moment. They tell me, they talk about salvation. They say, well, you weren't really saved then. It wasn't about salvation. It was, I don't like these debates, whether someone's saved or not saved, or are you born again, or are you not born again, or, you know, this whole debate, and they're always trying to re-save you all the time. Well, there was times in my life I was more saved than anybody, even though I was being, you know, ruined by society. I probably felt closer to God than any human being ever has, because I was alone many times. But anyway, that's not a point of the story. But anyway, this moment was, I was out in the woods, and it had rained the night before, and I woke up. Let me see what time it is. I woke up, and I opened up the door, and it had just rained. It had just rained. And it was, if I remember correctly, it was really stormy or it rained or whatever, and I opened up the door, and what I was about ready to see was just unbelievable. It was one of those beautiful sights where you open up the door, and the sun was just beaming through. It was just so beautiful. The sun was beaming through, and the fog was just lifting, and the sun was hitting the rain that had collected in the petals, and there was water on the ground. And I look up, and I catch this deer. Later, this will be very significant in my life if you follow my story. This deer looks up at me, this fawn. This deer looks up at me, and it's lapping up water, and it's not scared away at all. It looks up at me, and I connect with it, and it goes back lapping in water. It's not scared. And all of a sudden, I cannot explain it. It's just one of those moments. It was so beautiful, and it was so picturesque. It was the first time in my life I ever remember, as a young man, thinking to myself, there must be a God, and I must be here for some reason. You know, if there's a God, I must be created for some reason. And anyway, I was a young kid, so basically, great moment, you know, I was like, wow, whoa, you know, heavy. And I'm like, okay, next. And so I'm off running around. It won't be until years later that story will come back to me and bring new meaning. But anyway, so you were wondering why that song always was important to me. As the deer pants for the water, Psalms 42. As the deer pants for the water, so my soul longeth after you, Lord, or something like that. It's been a long time. So, boy, times up north with Presqu'île. Man, I love the cold up there. I love the winters. I love the moments. Just me and my hut, called the Hideaway. It was awesome. The Hideaway, built by my grandfather. One of my great fond memories. I miss it up there. It was a good time in my life.